Hey friends, I'm Otis Gibbs, and this is Eric Thompson. He played bluegrass with Jerry Garcia back before the Grateful Dead, and he's going to share some history with us.
This story of looking at me meeting Garcia, getting to that point in my life. It begins with as a 4 year old in 1950, the Weavers were extremely popular. They were a pop group singing folk songs in a fairly theatrical style, but Pete Seeger was in the band, and they had this hit on top of Old Smoky, which little boy, little Eric really, really loved. And then the Kingston Trio came along. And they were actually from right where I lived. I was in Palo Alto. They were in Menlo Park. And, they had Hang Down Your Head, Tom Dooley, and The Man Who Never Returned as the MTA. And so I said, oh, yeah, I recognize that sound. But I always say, because, the folk music and liberal politics were interlocked in folk clubs in urban hip places, and so you get to Pete Seeger's younger brother, half brother, Mike Seeger, pretty fast. And Mike Seeger had was starting in '57, was urban guys playing the music on old country records and the New Lost City Ramblers. And so like I say, is sometimes it's like I went from the Kingston Trio to the New Lost City Ramblers in not that many months. And then that leads you into Mike Seeger's album for Folkways, which had voluminous notes uh, about bluegrass, mountain music bluegrass style, and he laid it all out. So, I absorbed all that, and then I got right on the case doing that. And you're supposed to have a nice old dreadnought. That's what the guys like. Well, I found one when I was 15, and then, it really had the sound. And then that made me a popular guy. And then it also comes with this cachet of, oh man, look what it's lived through. Well, he didn't, but anyway, so that gets us to maybe 61, me being totally into this kind of stuff, and Jerry entering that little world, having been kicked out of the army, and that little world also included, more politics, music stuff, because Joan Baez was from Palo Alto, a few years older than me. And her peace mentor, Ira Sandpearl, ran Kepler's books. And, the stories come about, Jerry and his friends were hanging out at Kepler's. Yes, they were. Ira Sandpearl actually hated having music there, but it doesn't matter. It's just this nexus. So Jerry gets into the folk world, not exactly sure, but he got into it, and Jerry is when he gets into something, he was able to devour kind of the whole thing really fast and start doing it. So he got into playing folk music, and then the bluegrass and old time music was happening right around there. And so I think we're thinking late 61, early 62, probably late 61. And Nerdy Eric was already into this stuff, and had, I had kind of a mentor from the New York bluegrass scene who came to Stanford and found me and just laid all this information on me. So anyway, so I was actually, though 4 years older than Jerry, kind of a big kid. And so we just found each other. And, I can't remember exactly when, but it's like once we knew about each other, we started doing things together. And that's how I met Jerry. Well, coffee house a little bit, but mostly we were just getting together and trying to play. And listening to tapes. Well, my friend Adams, Otis, who had been in the New York scene, he had these like live tapes of Bill Monroe shows that he got from Mike Seeger, and tapes of old 78s, and we would nerd out, I guess you call it. Anyway, we connected right away, and then we just played music together, or were watching what each other were doing, and and that really continued on uh, kind of to the beginning of the Warlocks, which grew into the. And then when I was living right there, basically with them, well, Garcia was with Sarah, but uh, when they added Phil, I watched Jerry go, "You're gonna play bass in this band," and that's to me the beginning of when it became something that was definitely going to go someplace, because Phil had never played a string instrument in his life. He was a trumpet player in high school, and then he did avant-garde music where there was a music program at Mills College. So he moved down, and then he was in the room across from me, and he comes over and he says, "Eric, how does this thing work?" And then I said, "Well, you see, you kind of play a scale like this." "Oh, thank you." And he walked back to his room. But, okay, so it became right then, socially swirl things happening, that it was obvious that this thing was going to go someplace. And what I say about it is that the sharks started circling immediately because they knew there was meat there. Sometimes I get asked, "Eric, why weren't you in the Grateful Dead?" And the answer is, number one, remember Jerry was the banjo player in the Black Mountain Boys, and I was the guitar player. Now Jerry was playing the guitar, and I wasn't as pretty as Weir, but really, as soon as it became clear how much energy there was on this, I didn't really want to be around it, because it was like all of the people who were suddenly hangers-on, who were takers, were all there. And if you were even this far from the center, they all figured out he's just another suck-up, like us, except, guess what? I wasn't. So, I stayed friendly with everybody, especially Jerry, and, we'd get together and visit and all this stuff. But I did not want to be right there, because it wasn't me, I mean, one of the messages that Jerry projected, not exactly spelling it out, but the idea is, he says, make your own scene. That's the message. If you want to have it, make your own scene. Well, if you see, what my guitar looks like, it looked like that when I got it. It had obviously been played by, a country singer in a electric band, and he was just pounding it out. That's how they did, because the electric bands weren't that loud, frankly. But, like Hank Williams or any of those guys, they had a dreadnought, or Ernest Tubb, any of them, they had a dreadnought, and this is one of them, clearly. And what would happen is that they'd put heavy gauge strings on them because they needed to try and, be heard. And then a lot of tension would pull up the top. And then Martin warranty, they'd send them back. And so around 1946, my guitar is a 43, which actually is even more flexible, because in 1943, because of the war, they couldn't have a metal truss rod. And so there's a ebony truss rod. Anyway, it was 1946, Martin says, "Well, okay, we're just going to brace him heavier." And then, of course, it clammed them up. And especially when those 50s guitars were brand new and hadn't had a chance to be kind of, the stuff brought out of them, they just were quieter and didn't have the rich throat and everything of these ones, which were not that much older, really just a few years. And like guys like Red Allen will say, nah, about guitar, I like them old yaller ones.
So there's a quotes from Tony Rice about your guitar.
Yeah, I got to know Tony when Grisman was just putting together the quintet, and I went over and visited, and we kind of hit it off, you know. And then when I was asked to make a Kicking Mule record, the bluegrass guitar record, I thought about it and says, well, this is a little audacious, but I said, Tony, you are overqualified for the job, but would you play rhythm guitar for me on this record? And he's like, oh, sure, man, and spectacular stuff. But so he knew my guitar. That's what I'm really getting at is that, from hanging out, but also there, he knew that guitar. And then when he did that interview with Guitar Player, is that right? I think.
I'm not sure who it was with.
But the article. And they talked about the evolution of Clarence White's rhythm guitar, which actually had action like that. Clarence didn't really play the lead on that, but that's neither here. Tony got that guitar, and, it was his iconic guitar. And so this article was about that. And then at the end, they say, well, Tony, now, is there any other guitars that you might think about? And he says, yeah, Norman Blake's D28 and Eric Thompson's D28. And so a lot of people read that. And there's a lot of other great guitars, too. But, getting that guitar when I was 15, it meant that really I had no excuse for not being able to play because, I couldn't say, oh man, if I had a better guitar, well, not, and but it's also, right there, it's like, just play it. Oh, there's the sound, and of course you fall in love with it, so you play. Like I said, yeah, I knew about it, but, it's like, went over to visit David and check out, because they were just starting the quintet. And so I went over to check out and,
Did you have later interactions with him?
Yeah, we'd see each other and, yeah. He was funny, though. It's like, I remember it might have been involved listening to recordings, or something, it was kind of like, it's all hot, man. I never took lessons, but, I always tried to play with people who were better than me. And, share things, because you get excited. Hey, man, look at it. At this Owensboro thing, Peter Warnick was there, and, or Pete, I think he is now. Was a bluegrass kid from the Washington Square scene, that David was part of, Jody Stecker was part of, the list could go on and on. And he came to Palo Alto because his dad was he's a professor, he did a summer thing at Stanford, and so here was Pete Warnick. And he found us right away. He looked at, asked at the music store, just thinking, oh, there might be some folk music, and found out right away that there's these bluegrass nerds. So he found us, and he laid out the whole scene in Washington Square, bluegrass guys, to me. So, so I already knew all this stuff, and also Sing Out magazine kind of is the Young's Frets and Frails. You got kind of a picture of what was happening. So I played in the Black Mountain Boys with Jerry and David, kind of really fall of '63, entering into winter, and then I was chasing a girl who actually didn't want to have anything to do with me, but you know, also got the intermixed details here. In Berkeley was kind of a music store, John and Deirdre Lundberg, which was in many ways one of the little birthplaces of vintage instrument consciousness. And the guy who was originally from like Ann Arbor folk scene, then in the Berkeley folk scene, he was around. Mark Silber is his name. And so he was around Lundberg's, and it's like late '63, he's going, hey man, I'm going to the village to open a store, you ought to come. So yeah, I did, and so naturally, went to the store. Well, it turns out that Grisman and his friend Fred Weiss, who were, already extreme bluegrass nerds because David had been mentored by Ralph Rinsler, who happened to live there in Passaic, New Jersey. So David was coming into New York every day to go to NYU, and then, of course, he would go to Mark's store and hang and pick. So as soon as I was there was David. And we already kind of knew about each other. So it was just like, okay, and then we formed a band to play at the Union Grove, well, to play at the coffee house, but also to play at the Union Grove Fiddlers Convention. So Winnie Winston was the banjo player, and Gene Lowinger was the fiddle player, and Fred Weiss was the bass player. And we went and we entered because you got gas money. It was really cool. The Fiddlers Convention, it was really cool. It was in the schoolhouse, and it was just great event, So we had no idea that, trying to win, but we did win. And, we won because actually we were pretty good. I mean, David played rawhide perfect. I mean, really, really good, because he just obsessed on that stuff. And, he even played the high part that is on the record, but Monroe never did in, shows. And then the banjo player was Winnie Winston, and he had Don Reno style picking, like that. Really good. And we played this tune, Follow the Leader, that's very showy. So, I understand why we won. That's the elongated version of how I met David. I didn't play a lot of different styles or anything, but I was pretty good at making the bluegrass sound. I had the guitar to do it, so I made I was a presence. And also, there weren't many flat pickers in the urban scene, and, there were a lot of guys who were in Nashville scene and everything. There were a lot of guys who could, play rings around me and did all that. But, because of how the world is, they played electric guitars just like Doc did when Ralph Rinsler found him, Anyway, so here we are in the village, and the Mark's store is kind of over here on 6th Avenue, and then a couple blocks over is a little sandal shop, Alan Block's sandal shop. This is where Joan Baez bought her sandals. He was also an old-time fiddle player, so he would have a group of friends, and they'd play music there in the morning. And I would wake up and get a little pastry and then go there and hang and play, and then go to Mark's store and hang and play with David, This little group of old-time musicians, they're Alan and Alan, and ironically, Walter Gundy, Maria's first husband, he produced a record called Old Time Banjo Project, and I played on that. So I made this funny little name for myself, not by design, but that's so. The Beatle Country record came as an idea because the very first record that Paul Rothchild produced was Charles River Valley Boys record. Bob Siggins of the Charles River Valley Boys came to Paul, hey, we have this demo tape, we want to make another album. So on the album was I've Just Seen a Face, the obvious Beatles song for bluegrass. And Paul Rothchild had already had a huge success with the Baroque Beatles book, which was an album of Beatles melodies set in like Scarlatti-like sessions, played on the harpsichord by Josh Rifkin, who was in the Even Dozen Jug Band. Grisman was in that too, John Sebastian, like Steve Katz, which Paul Rothchild produced. So he already knew that some kind of Beatles fusion thing might sell. So they decided to record it in Nashville, really go all out. And for some reason, they didn't really think about just having some Nashville guy flat pick the guitar, so they called me up and got me. Actually, they didn't call me up. They looked for me, and the aforementioned Lundberg Guitar Store, which was just a little mecca of, it's like Bobby Newirth would be there. It's like all, And so they obviously didn't have my phone number or anything, so I walk into Lundberg's, and Deirdre goes, Paul Rothchild is looking for you. He wants to fly you to Nashville. So very exciting. And there's some interesting to me stories, maybe to you. They hired Buddy Spiker as a sideman. So we were teaching Buddy these tunes, and he's kind of going, wow, where do these tunes come from? I always thought bluegrass should be more like this. And, we said, well, it's from this British rock band, the Beatles. The Who? No, But really, the Beatles, not putting us on. Not putting us on in the slightest. Nashville was so insular that no consciousness penetrated whatsoever of the Beatles. And I just, thinking back on it, I've always found that fascinating. I mean, I just remember the look on Buddy's face and everything, and it was,
What year was this?
66. It was early 66. Well, that thing, it was basically I was flown there, did the stuff in the studio, flown home. I didn't have... my other Nashville experience came earlier when when I ended up in New York there, and where David was. I drove across the country, and I went through Nashville, and I went to the Ryman Auditorium and saw an Opry show, and it's like, oh, that's a memory you can have, because it's not like that anymore. And, I really got to see it. Amazing. I'm sure Roy Acuff, though. In fact, I do, because, he does stagey things, like maybe he balanced a bow on his nose. I can't remember, but actually, at the time, I didn't so much appreciate his style, but listening back, says, oh, actually, I see why. It was cornier than bluegrass, So even though, like, Flatt and Scruggs took Uncle Josh from Roy Acuff and put it in, the Foggy Mountain Boys. I just remember watching, it's like, it was a radio show, so it wasn't staged, really. It was staged for the audience, but the audience didn't mind watching guys carrying amps and steels and stuff on and off. And
Did you ever witness any? Was there friction between the regular bluegrass diehards back when, and the fact that you were from the West Coast, or some of you might have been from New York, or did you ever experience any problems like that?
I was trying to think of that. Uh,
We
I
think,
don't really think so. I don't really think so. Um,
I guess if you could play, that just breaks down every barrier.
musicians don't. Musicians mostly don't care about this stuff. You know, and also I wasn't there that much, really. I mean, as far as interacting with bluegrass people down south, I was at the convention, but I didn't really do that. And some of the bands would come to the West Coast, which was really cool for us. It's like the great version of the Bill Monroe band, with Dell in it and Bill Keith in it. They came to L.A. and Ash Grove, and then they came, to the Bay Area. And Strockwitz, Chris Strockwitz of our Hooley Records, he and another record collector, Bob Pinson, put on uh, a show right there in Palo Alto, or it was in San Jose, but it doesn't matter. And Dell's solo song always, Bill Monroe show, you do this and this, and now a solo song from our guitar player, and so he did I Wonder Where You Are Tonight, and Dell sings that great. And Strockwitz is in love with that, and, immediately said, well, I want to come and, make a record of you, which he did, and that's Dell's first record. What I'm really getting at, though, is that because there was a little circle within people my age and a little older from the urban scene, but also people in just the country scene who knew Monroe. So there was a little pocket, like Vern and Ray were there, and so there was kind of access, to being right close, because they weren't big shows or anything. Listen, man, I can't believe I lived in that time, and that, sometimes they say, well, you just fell into something great. Well, maybe, but, I was already working on my pond, it's like, I mean, because of sort of an obsessed little kid who really was really in it, then stuff came to me. So, it's like, well, you fell into stuff, but, it was also somehow, once you got on a certain route, then, you got led to all this cool stuff. Yeah. But I gotta say, it was an amazing time, and I was fortunate or blessed or something to have been able to do all that, that it's like my life. I'm going to retreat to my normal.
If I ever flew out to Berkeley,
You could stay at our house.
would you let me film something of you playing your guitar and talking about it?
Oh, yeah, that's fine. You can
Okay.
stay in our house if you need to.
Oh gosh, there's always that roadway in,